So, dealing with difficult people, we all know what it feels like. Maybe it is a colleague who criticizes everything you do, a manager who micromanages your every move, a customer who becomes aggressive or unreasonable. But now, today, I'm not talking about like serious cases like abusers or diagnosing people with personality disorders. I'm talking about everyday difficult people, people we encounter at work, at social situations, and in our personal lives. But have you ever found yourself asking, why are they like this? Are they even aware of their behavior? Is it something they learned? But most importantly, what can we do when we have to deal with difficult people? So, today we're going to explore the psychology behind difficult behavior, practical strategies that you can use to protect your well being while still functioning in challenging environments. So, let's begin. So, what actually makes someone difficult? First, we need to understand something very important. A difficult person is not always a bad person. Sometimes difficult behaviors come from poor emotional regulation, limited self awareness, stress, insecurity, poor communication patterns that someone has learned throughout their life. Let me give you an example. Someone who constantly interrupts may have learned that being louder is the way to be heard. Someone who becomes defensive when receiving feedback may have grown up in an environment where mistakes were criticized or punished rather than discussed. Someone who needs excessive control may have learned that uncertainty feels unsafe, and controlling situations help them feel safe. Human behavior, though, usually has a history. The way people respond today is often influenced by what they experienced, observed, or learned in the past. Let's look at children, for example. Children learn by watching. They observe how their parents communicate. Children observe how conflict is handled. Children also observe if people apologize, compromise, listen, or attack. A person may not consciously wake up thinking, today I'm going to control people. No. Instead, their brain may automatically follow a familiar pattern that they have repeated for years. Another example, someone who learned that anger gets results may use anger when they feel frustrated. Someone who grew up around intimidation may repeat intimidating behavior. Someone who struggles with emotional regulation may react impulsively without considering the impact on others. But understanding where behavior comes from does not excuse harmful behavior. Compassion does not mean accepting mistreatment. It simply helps us to understand what we are dealing with and respond more effectively. So let's talk about difficult people versus bullies. One important distinction to understand the difference between someone who is difficult and someone who is intentionally targeting another person. A difficult person may have, yes, poor communication skills, struggle with emotional regulation, be unaware of how their behavior affects others. They can become defensive under pressure, have a personality style that clashes with others. For example, a stressed manager who becomes short-tempered during a busy period may be difficult to work with. However, someone who repeatedly humiliates, isolates, undermines another person is moving into bullying behavior. Bullying is usually also a pattern. It involves a power imbalance, repeated behavior, intimidation, even harm, an attempt to control, punish, diminish, of course, another. Examples can be spreading rumors, deliberately withholding important information, publicly embarrassing another person, sabotaging someone's work, constantly attacking someone's character, rather than addressing the real situation. The difference is not simply that the behavior feels unpleasant. The difference is the pattern, the intention, and of course, the impact. So why do we get so triggered when we interact with difficult people? So sometimes difficult people is just not the only factor here. Our own nervous system also plays an important role. So when someone criticizes us, dismisses us, or creates conflict, our brain can interpret this as a threat. So we may move into the following responses. Fight. I need to defend myself. Flight. I need to escape the situation. Freeze. I don't know what to say. Fawn. I need to keep this person happy so they don't become angry. Many people struggle in difficult workplaces because their nervous system is constantly activated. They go home replaying the conversations. They think about what they should have said, what they should have done, and they worry about the next interaction over and over. Of course, this can be emotionally exhausting. The goal is not to become emotionless. No, of course not. The goal is to develop the ability to pause, regulate your emotions, and also choose your response. So what can you do when you're dealing with a difficult colleague or a boss? In therapy, I've had many clients say this to me. My workplace is toxic. Should I just quit? Let's be real for a moment. Sometimes leaving, yes, is the healthiest option, but not everyone can just leave on the spot. We can't. The reality is people have financial responsibilities, paying for rent or a mortgage, putting food on the table, and let's not also forget medical bills and insurance. So the question becomes more, how can I protect myself while I'm still in this situation? So what can you do? First of all, I want you to eliminate the idea that I can change the person. I can change my boss. I can change my colleagues. No, you can't. No. The reality is you can't change your boss or your co-workers. The power comes from changing your response. So let that sink in for a moment. You can control your communication, your boundaries, your professionalism, how much emotional energy you give, but you cannot control someone's personality, someone's maturity, or their willingness to change. You can't. It's also very important to communicate clearly and calmly. So difficult people often create emotional reactions. The more the emotional interaction becomes, the harder it is to resolve. So I will try to keep the communication factual. Avoid long explanations where someone can twist your words around and create more arguments. Focus on what happened, what needs to happen next, what solution can we work towards. Another strategy you can use is documenting the patterns. If someone is behaving inappropriately at work, keep records. Write down dates. What happened? Who was present during that time? What was said? How did it affect your work? This is not about revenge. This is about clarity. So of course, if you ever need support from HR, management, or another authority, having a record helps to explain a pattern. Also, emotional boundaries, especially in high-pressure industries. Some industries experience more exposure to difficult behavior because workers interact with people who are more stressed, frightened, angry, or demanding. So think about frontline workers. Often become the person who receives emotions that are not actually about them. So think about doctors, nurses, reception staff, carers, allied health workers. They all deal with people who are, for example, frightened about their health, are probably in pain, grieving, frustrated with waiting times, overwhelmed by the circumstances. Understanding that someone is scared or distressed can create empathy, of course. But empathy does not mean accepting abuse, threats, or intimidation. If we look at the industries like hospitality and retail, workers will deal with unrealistic expectations, complaints about prices or policies, demands, or, it's almost like they expect to have some sort of special treatment. And yes, people can become aggressive when they don't get what they want. Customers that also dine and dash too, we've heard about that. A common phrase that we constantly hear, the customer is always right, but I would reframe that like this. The customer, yes, deserves respect, but the worker also deserves respect too. So I'm going to play you now a video where there was an interaction where someone's reaction was a lot bigger than the actual situation itself. Many of you have already seen this video, but I do want to discuss the psychological behavior side of it. So watch the video now. Now, I went to the comments sections and most people's reactions was this: how could she do that? Why did she do that? Okay, that's a common thing. Why would someone do that? Now, we don't know the woman's past, her experiences, or what is happening internally for her in that moment. But psychology teaches us something very important. Behavior often has a history. Her reaction on the outside may be connected with patterns that have been developed over years. Sometimes a situation triggers emotions, behaviors, beliefs that existed long before that exact moment. Now, this raises an interesting question. What would have happened if the waitress had reacted differently? What if bystanders jumped in and became more aggressive? What if the situation just escalated? And this is why emotional regulation matters. This is why it's so important. Again, understanding behavior does not excuse behavior, because often the behavior we just saw has roots that began long before that interaction. A situation like that doesn't prepare anyone in that moment. Difficult people often don't think what could happen or the consequences of their own behavior. So how can workers protect themselves emotionally? From situations, interactions too. Someone else's anger is not automatically evidence that you have done something wrong. A customer may be angry because they are frustrated, stressed, disappointed, or having a difficult day. Their emotional reaction belongs to them. Their emotions are not your responsibility. So it's very good to understand that and to identify that when someone reacts to you, their emotions, that belongs to them, nothing to do with you. Remember, think about like their emotion, that's not you. If you haven't done anything to them, there's something else going on with that person. Another thing, boundaries. Many people fear setting boundaries because they think it can come across rude. But boundaries can be respectful. For example, in a workplace of retail, I understand you're frustrated. I want to help. However, I need us to speak respectfully so we can resolve this. Something like in healthcare. I understand this situation is upsetting. I'm happy to discuss your concerns, but cannot continue the conversation while being spoken to that way. Even something in the workplace. Hey, I'm willing to discuss this issue, but I would like us to keep the conversation professional. That's when someone crosses the boundary and becomes very personal. Sometimes you are simply not prepared for another person's behavior. Always remember that your safety comes first. Another way to protect yourself emotionally, don't replay what happened. Don't replay it over and over at home. It's a very common problem for empathetic people to take difficult encounters home. What should have I said? Was I wrong? Why did they treat me like that? Once you finish work and go home, that's your time to chill, not to be more stressed out. So remember, difficult behavior is a learned pattern. It can come from insecurities, stress, poor emotional regulation, or experiences from someone's past. Understanding someone does not mean accepting mistreatment. Compassion does not mean having no boundaries. The goal is to protect your well-being, communicate effectively, and stay connected to your own values. If you are dealing with a difficult person, ask yourself, what can I control? What boundaries do I need? Because while we cannot always choose the people around us, we can learn how to respond to them. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.